Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first faculty workshop of our fall semester. This one is on introducing 1-minute mental reflections for students. Thanks to everyone that helped this possible, especially Janet for preparing this and all of our AOI folks. All of these will be video conferenced, and we have also introduced a very exciting AOI Innovative Teaching Series certificate. So if you actually attend all of the faculty workshops this semester or 4th through the academic year, I think, then you get a certificate. And there's a spot on our website where you can kind of request it, and we'll send you a beautiful copy. So we also we offer a lot of trainings. We had a lot on Blackboard and Collaborate Ultra, and then like student success, that kind of thing. And we also offer individual and group training if y'all want to do that. We have everything on our LI website if y'all are interested in that. Anything you need, we can help you with. We also have our Faculty Insider. If y'all are not part of our AOI listserv, I encourage you to be part of that. We have weekly tips coming out every week and kind of new and upcoming things we'll kind of put there. And you can also look at past tips there. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Janet Peters. She's a clinical assistant professor from the Department of Psychology, located on our beautiful WSU Tri-Cities campus. And I'll let her take it away. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm super excited to be here. And I don't know if you folks on Pullman know or if you can see our audience here, but this is a really good turnout for WSU Tri-Cities. On our end, I am very thrilled. And I can see, I recognize a few of you. Can you hear me?
But we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh.
The camera's straight at the podium.
And you can't hear my magical voice?
How many folks are in the Tri-Cities?
We have 4, 8, 9, 10.
10, all right. I think you beat Poland.
Yeah, we're rocking. Can you see me?
Yes, now we can see you.
Okay. Yeah, so we have 10 of us here, which again, for Tri-Cities, that's pretty awesome. And I see some of you in Pullman that I recognize. I think Samantha and Sammy. Hi. But without too much further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So what we're going to kind of look at today is, and I'm a wanderer, so if I ever wander out of camera or that you can't hear me, please let me know. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background of where does this come? What is this idea of 1-minute mental reflections? What does it mean to say we need to give our students a break? Why do we have to give them a break? So I'll do a little bit of that, not much. The bulk of our time will be here in the classroom examples. What are ways that I do it? And then more importantly, what are ways that you can do it? I'm a big believer that for any workshop, I think participants should be able to walk out with something, an idea, even if it's like an ill-formed idea, but something that can be extrapolated on, but walking away with something of value in your toolbox. And then the last thing we'll do is I kind of have some final thoughts of some of my, if you want to, you can learn from my failures, of which I've had plenty. And so just some of the things I've learned along the way from doing these types of activities with our students. So just really quickly, super quick, I'm not here to lecture you, believe it or not. I thought we would talk about attention and memory, because honestly, that's the crux of the issue that we're facing. We have all sat and lectured and had our students' eyes glaze over, right? I mean, that's just part of the reality of teaching. And it's hard to pay attention for 50 minutes, for 75 minutes. And to be there and be engaged the whole time it is really hard. And all you have to do to understand that is sit through a faculty meeting. Our classes are our students' versions of faculty meetings. And so what can we do? Are there small things that we can do to sort of pull them back in? And so the first question I ask is, why is paying attention important? And of course, this is tongue-in-cheek, right? I don't actually need you guys to answer. But, right, if they don't pay attention to begin with, if they're on their phones, if they're zoning out, if they're thinking about the date they have tonight, or how they're going to pay their rent, or the concerns that our students have, they're not listening to you. And if the information never goes in, it never comes out. So it has to, at minimum, go in, right? I mean, and even if it goes in, we can't guarantee that it's going to come out. But if it doesn't go in to begin with, there's no way. There's just no way. If they're tuning us out, if they're not listening, if their minds are elsewhere, playing on their phones. It's just not going to happen for us. So we know why it's important. However, why is it so difficult? How come I can't sit here and talk to you for 75 minutes and you're tuned into me the whole time? Your undivided, perfect attention. I can't give that to someone, you can't give that to someone, and our students can't give it to us. And the question is why not? And the answer is because we're humans. Our brains habituate to things. So when you talk and talk and talk and talk, we naturally tune that stuff out, right? We habituate to the sound. I went to graduate school in Fort Collins, which they have trains everywhere in Fort Collins. If you've ever been there or lived there. The first 3 weeks, I thought, oh my God, I picked the wrong graduate school. I cannot live through the sound of the trains. They would wake me up. I couldn't study. But after a few weeks, months, whatever of living there, like I tuned them out. And that's what we do as humans. When things become constant, we begin to tune them out. And so the idea of these, so that's why it's so difficult, because that's kind of human nature. When things get boring and stale, our body reads them as no longer important, and so we switch our mind to things that are more engaging. So the most important question, and I think the reason that you're here, is like, what can we do? If you teach a 50-minute, a 75-minute class, how can we reinvigorate our students? How can we, when they start to drift, right, and you see that eyes glaze over, what is something that we can do to pull them back in? And that's really what this talk is all about, is how do we pull them back in? So the other thing I want to tell you about this talk is this isn't a silver bullet. This isn't like you can walk off and it'll be perfect. If it was, I would have monetized it. I'd be a billionaire. I wouldn't be here, and everyone would be perfect teachers. So while I think that these are some really good ideas, I think everyone has to think carefully of, what does this look like for you? Like, I'll give lots of examples of what I've done, but I think you have to be thinking, what does this look like for you, for your classes? Intro level class, very different than a 400 level class. Class of 10 students, very different than a class of 100, or some of the numbers that you folks see in Pullman, which is like unfathomable to me. So, what are these 1-minute reflections? Basically, you're just giving them a chance, even if it's 60 seconds, to take a break, to synthesize information, to maybe apply it depending on exactly what you're doing, and to just get them recharged, right? You're moving along in lecture, and it creates a stopping point, a point that pulls them back into it, where they're not tuning you out, because instead of asking them to sit and just take notes, you're changing what they're doing. They now have to be active in the classroom, even if it's for 60 seconds, even if it's for 2 minutes. It gives them that chance to come back to where you are. So then when you start lecturing again, so you lecture, give them a break, they'll pay attention for that little bit behind the break, right? And so we infuse these things to pull our students back in. So there's a number of ways in which you can do this. And I'm going to share some of them that I do with my students, with you guys. But there's tons of ways you can do this. The first is you can do what are called minute papers, or I call them mini writings. And you can have a prompt in your class and say, write about this for 60 seconds. And the first time you do it, you're going to be like, that is not enough time. And it will, and the students will be like, that is definitely not enough time. The point isn't to get them to write an essay that's got 3 paragraphs and that it's perfectly well formed. The point is to give them a chance to think. When someone talks and talks and talks and talks at you, think about a conversation that you have with your friends, your loved ones. It's a dialogue. It goes back and forth. That 1-minute paper gives them a chance to contribute to that dialogue. It gives them a chance to say, okay, you've been telling me about theory A, B, and C. I can take a short amount of time and write about it. And so it really gives them the opportunity to take a mental break from taking notes, reflect on the content, apply the content, and then re-engage them in what you're saying. The other thing you can do, that I call them knowledge checks, and you see this acronym PODs, that's problem of the day. Sometimes I'll assign these mini problems while I'm talking, and they'll pull out a sheet of paper, and throughout the class I'll be like, okay, this is a problem of the day, and I'll just ask a question, and they just jot down an answer. And sometimes the answer is one word. Sometimes it's a sentence. Sometimes it's a drawing in stats because we do graphs. So sometimes it's like a graph. But it's pretty brief, and they just kind of keep it by their notes, and at the end of the day, and we'll talk about this, they turn it in. And they get some varying form of credit, which will depend on the class. But, so that's another way to do it. You can also do think, pair, share. This is much less formal, right? You can ask them a question, and one of the things that we know from the research is when you ask students questions, particularly, you know this if you teach freshmen, coming right out of high school can often feel insecure in a class. They're less likely to raise their hand. And then you fall into the pattern of you get the same 3 confident students. Whether or not that confidence is earned is debatable, but you get the same 3 students answering the questions. Think, pair, share is nice because it gives them a chance to think about and form an answer on their own, right? So they have their own opinion. Then they talk about it and they share it with someone next to them. And then one of the things I noticed in my classes is more people are willing to answer because they've had the chance to check in and say, like, am I crazy for thinking this? Or, like, is this the right answer? And so you get a little bit more diverse students contributing to the class. So that's another way you can do it. And there's 10 million more ways that you're far more creative than I am, but these are some of the ones that I do. So, oh, I forgot. Kahoot and clickers. I don't use Kahoot, but I know some people in the room do, and I know some people in Pullman do. I do use clickers, and those are super awesome. So I'll show you an example of clicker questions, but if you don't know what they are, they're like the electronic response system, and the students answer a multiple choice question, and you can get the graph on the board, so you can see how well your class did. It's nice feedback for you. Are they getting it? Or have you, like, they're all off base, their answers are everywhere, and maybe you need to take a minute to elaborate. Because honestly, it doesn't do us any good to plow through material. If all we're doing is stringing them along to get through content, I mean, I think we're doing a disservice. So getting them, okay, do they seem to have the understanding, straightening out any understanding, and moving on. Okay, so this is my favorite part because I share examples from class. Can you guys see the board clear enough? Because I'm about to show you a picture. Pullman, can you guys see that?
No.
Well,
The PowerPoint, yes.
show
Okay,
us,
that's all I need. That's all I need. Okay, so I'm going to put a picture up here, and you're going to look at it, and I want you to think about what this is a picture of. Anyone in Pullman, can you guys see it well enough to know what that's a picture of?
Is it a wedding cake?
It's a wedding, right?
Okay, it is.
What about this one?
Christmas tree.
It's a Christmas tree.
Looking at the eye doctor.
This is a test. What about this one?
Pom-poms.
I've heard cupcakes, loofahs, yarn, pom-poms. This one's a lot harder, right?
Piece, some sort of crochet thing.
There we go. It's a quilt. So this is an example. I show this in my intro class when we talk about sensation and perception. And we talk about the schemas that we have. Because how do you know that this is a wedding? Because in our culture, we celebrate weddings with white dresses and big cakes. But if you came from a culture that didn't celebrate weddings like that, you would have no idea what that's a picture of, right? You're using your cultural knowledge to answer this question. Or this question about Christmas trees. It's why this third picture is harder. You have less cues. And so your brain is running through like, okay, what kind of looks like that? What's bright and colorful and kind of circular? Cupcakes, loofahs, that's a great answer, poofs. So this is an example, and I let the students, they talk about it. And in the third picture, I purposely put as it's ambiguous because I want to stump them. And I want them to talk about it, and I want them to use the concepts as they talk about it. And so I can give them the definition all day long, but doing something like this that gives the chance to spark their curiosity, even for 10 seconds, reinvigorates them. And so being able to use pictures. This, and I know you won't actually be able to read it, the content isn't important, but you can see I've written out a scenario, and it's a multiple choice. This is how I use iClickers in my class. I'll go I'll have 4 or 5 slides of content, we'll talk about it, and then I'll throw up eye clickers, and they'll click in and they'll answer. And then we go over the right answer, and if the majority of them get it right, I say, good job, you're amazing, and we move on. If they get stuck, it's now a point of conversation that how do I get them unstuck? How do I get them to understand the concepts that I'm trying to convey to them? And so I love eye clickers. I don't know how y'all feel. I love them. This one is it's a mini writing. So you see that adorable picture of that cat? That cat's name is Boots. It's not really, but that's the name that I like. So I call him Boots, and I tell them a story about Boots and about how Boots, when he was this little kitten that you've adopted, and you start feeding him, but he's like really scared of people because you got him from the shelter, but Boots will come out for food. And pretty soon, the longer that you have Boots, as soon as he hears that can, Boots comes running out. And you're super elated. So sometimes you make the can opener sound just to get Boots out because you want to play with him. And so we talk about that story, and then they have to then use that to identify the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, the conditioned stimulus, the conditioned response. And they just jot it down. It's not, like I said, I don't expect a novel, but it's a fun way to A, assess their knowledge, and B, get them involved. Plus they love Boots. Pictures of animals are always a win. And then the part 2 is they have to then create their own. They have to apply the knowledge to their life. And that's something it's kind of a soapbox for me, is that if what you're doing, if your students don't understand how it's relevant to their life, you're not going to engage them. Just period. It's hard to engage if people don't understand why they should care. So using these as an opportunity to have them apply it. And then the last one I'll show you is I do the Heinz dilemma. So if you're not familiar with the Heinz dilemma, that's where Heinz is a man whose wife gets terminally ill, and a doctor has created the antidote to whatever her illness is, right? This incurable disease, he has the cure. And he says, yeah, you can have it for some gazillion millions of dollars. So the question becomes, should Heinz steal this antidote? And the students write down what they think Heinz should do. And after they write down what they think Heinz should do, we talk about the concepts behind it, about morality and choosing between right and wrong. And then they then have to say which stage of moral development they were in based on their response. So they get the chance to answer it, right, via written. And then once they've got it black and white on their paper, they then have to go back and take the theory and apply it to what they themselves have written. And so that's another way that I do in-class writings. So, for me, my inspiration comes from a ton of places. If you're sitting there like, oh, this sounds cool, but I don't know where to start, I would say literally everywhere. So, I use a lot of video clips. So sometimes I'll show them a video clip, and I will have them respond to it. So one of the ones I use in my research methods class and in my stats class is a video from Seinfeld, where I think hopefully our generation mostly know Seinfeld, but George decides to eat a donut out of the trash, and someone catches him. And him and Jerry get in this argument about whether or not it was trash, because George is like, it was on top. There was nothing touching it. And Jerry was like, yeah, but it was under the rim. And George is like, well, yeah, but it was on a doily. And Jerry says, well, yeah, but adjacent to refuse is still refuse. And then he asks, but was there a bite out of it? And George's like, one tiny little bite. So I show him this video that has ostensibly nothing to do with statistics or research methods, but that's a perfect example of operational definitions. They're defining what trash is. They're arguing about whether or not this donut is trash. And it's funny, and the students get a kick out of it, but it also conveys what I'm trying to teach, is that operational definitions are everywhere. Yes, we use them in research, and yes, they're important in research. We argue about operational definitions all the time. The whole argument about life and abortion is based on an operational definition. When does life begin? And people argue about when life begins. And so we talk about these things, and they get a chance to respond and write about them. You can also use GIFs. So I'm a big fan of GIFs. Do you guys know what GIFs are? Am I? Yeah. Okay. Mostly. Okay. So here's a GIF that I use, similar to the Booth story and intro. So this dog owner pops the top, and as soon as the dog hears it, the dog's there, right? And we talk about identify all of the pieces of classical conditioning. The unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. Again, students love animals, so it's a pretty big win. But maybe if you're in the sciences, and also warning, I don't know anything about science. So I did find some science GIFs, but they could be bad. So I really, as a non-scientist, I really liked this one because it demonstrates the density of air. And if you could set this up, that would be amazing. But like, I don't know how dangerous this air is, so I don't know if that's an option. But that's real, like, to me, that's really cool. That like very visually demonstrates this principle. And so it takes 2 seconds, right? You're not taking a lot out of your time. But if you could have them respond and say, why does this aluminum foil boat sink? And they have to use your class principles to explain why it's sinking, that's a win to me. Here's another one for math that I think is really interesting. This shows why a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Right? And it does it with volume and in a really visual way. And you can have them respond, and you can have them explain this, right? And you can talk about it. So that's GIFs. I also am a big, I use blogs, Facebook groups. For psychology, we have the Society of Teaching Psych, and I steal shamelessly everybody's ideas, because my feeling is I don't have to be creative if I can leverage other people's creativity, right? If other people are sharing their ideas about, like, here's a great video. That's how I found Seinfeld. I didn't think of that on my own. I wish I could take credit. I didn't. But a colleague of mine, I went to a talk and a colleague of mine used it. And I was like, that's genius. So don't feel like you have to create the wheel. That wheel has probably been created out there. It's a matter of tapping into those sources. Okay, this is the big question, right? Is what can you do? Because in this, like, at least here in Tri-Cities, we have people in the math department, political science, English, psychology, accounting, anthropology, right? And anything I tell you is not going to be perfect for all of you. So the question becomes, what can you do? So if you have a piece of paper, I like 3 minutes on the clock where you write about what could you do? What is one simple thing you could do even as early as tomorrow? And I'd like to see you identify the class, the concept, and the intervention. So we'll do 3 minutes. I'll give you 3 minutes. This clock says 12:32. And after you're done, we'll come back. So 3 minutes for brainstorming. Okay, that's 12:35. If you want, so what I'd like to do now is with the people around you, groups 2, 3, talk about what you could do and share what some, at least 1 or 2 of your ideas are that you could do in your class. So let's give 2 minutes to group discussion in groups of 2 or 3. Time to pull it in. So what I'm actually super curious is who I haven't got to hear from is Vancouver. So Vancouver, if there was like anything that you're like this, like that sparked anything that you're super, that you would be like, I could do this tomorrow, or anything that you want to share, like what were some of the ideas that you came up with? What class are you teaching, and what could you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm teaching economics, and actually I just started using Kahoot, and I find that's really, the students love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, absolutely.
So I just, after I'm talking about something for a while, I have them answer questions, and it really gets, I put them in teams, and then all of a sudden, like, the energy level just increases in the classroom. So, and then they're ready to come back and listen to something else and do problems. So I find that really, I agree with you. I think those things are really great.
Awesome. Anyone else in Vancouver want to share?
Yeah.
I mean, Janet, I'm teaching biology 111, and just recent, I just shared this this thing with with people who are sitting over here. I teach microbiology class as well, and I used humor as a breaking point, or as giving a break in between the lecture. And I think humor also brings the students back to your lecture. They engage or connect more with the instructor.
Yep, absolutely. And I would add, like, if anyone's considering that, there's a lot of good research that supports humor in the classroom. But the caveat to that is that the humor can't be directed outwards. Right? So not humor at students, not that I'm suggesting that you're doing that, just as a general note for anyone interested in humor, is that humor has to, like, it can't be directed outwards, because that isn't effective for building rapport and relationships with students. But, you know, like poking fun at yourself or other lighthearted humor is great for classroom, the give and take of any classroom setting. That's awesome. I love that you do that, especially in a class that's so heavy. Pullman, what about you guys? You guys were the Wild Wild West over there, so clearly cooking up some beautiful ideas. What did you guys come up with?
I'll share. Yeah.
Oh, no, just fine.
Yeah, a friend of mine just recently gave me a clip, a comedian talking about birth and why it's so great to give birth in a hospital setting rather than, at home. And I teach human development, a course on child development in the Department of Human Development. And we're just about to talk about birth and the newborn period, so I thought I could have my students, so we could use the comedy clip sort of just to bring us all to the table, and they could write a little bit about some of the risks and benefits of giving birth in a hospital setting versus in a home setting. And then we would go through the material, and they could give them a chance to sort of check what their intuitions were with what's known about those different settings.
Cool. Love it. Anyone else?
This isn't something I talked about, but I was just thinking about it right now as we were all talking. I teach ESL, and I had subbed in a class that was reading a story about the border. And so then after we read the essay together, I put up a photograph of an installation artist, a French installation artist who's done this awesome piece of this, maybe you've seen it, this child looking over the border wall. And I had this up, and they had to get into groups and discuss what the artist was trying to say. And I don't usually bring art into the classroom, and I was so glad I did, because there was so much, well, maybe he's saying this, or there was just such a great dialogue that came out of using that, visual material, so.
Mm-hmm. I like that because I feel like that gets to the point of sort of the message I'm trying to say is the way that we run a class day to day is pretty monotonous. I think that's the truth of it. We get up here, we share our lecture slides, we talk at students for 50 or for 75 minutes. They're exhausted. I don't know about y'all. I'm exhausted. And doing something like that, taking something unexpected like art and putting it in the middle of a class that doesn't have art, breeds conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that, like, infusing that break for people, like, even just the volume when you guys started, it was that, like, kind of like, I'm sharing my idea, but I'm a little nervous about it, so I'll talk like this. And then by the end, I'm, like, waving people down and trying to get them to stop talking. Because we all need that break and that time to pick apart and digest what we've just learned. And when you talk at someone for 50 minutes, you're not giving them that break. And so I think we love having those types of stimulation in a 50, 75-minute lecture class. So,
Janet?
Wonderful job. Yeah. Yes?
Can you talk about if you're still sort of in the model of giving a traditional 50-minute lecture and you want to break it up with these 1-minute exercises, how many of them or how often?
I think it depends on the content of the lecture. For an intro, I actually do less because that class tends to be, intro to psychology I'm referring to, tends to be more engaging. Students are just kind of naturally more engaged in the content. In my stats class, I do more. Right? I put up pictures, or I do knowledge checks, I do problems of the day. I try and do about one every 10 minutes. Even if it's just a picture for them to look at really quickly, or that we say as a class, like, what does this mean? What does this look like? I shoot for one every 10 minutes in the classes that I think attention is of utmost importance and is more difficult. But it could vary depending on the class.
Great, thank you.
Great question. Other questions? I didn't even ask you guys. Do you have questions? What can I help with?
This may be a question for you or for the broader group, but has anyone tried these with AMS classes? And are there special challenges or things to think about over AMS?
Did you guys hear that? That's a great question. Has anyone done this over AMS or have advice or thoughts, failures to share?
I've not done anything like this over AMS, but at a previous school I taught using Zoom, and it completely changed how I had to do activities like this in my classroom because some things wouldn't show up or people wouldn't see things or couldn't see them clearly. And I don't have any good recommendations for that, but I had some failures.
Pullman, Vancouver, anyone have advice or insight into this question? I don't, unfortunately. I haven't. I was saying when I started, I last time had to talk to an empty room via AMS, and it was the worst. So I don't have any helpful advice. Anyone?
How was the instructor sharing content with the other students when they were doing the activity? That just gave the example.
There's usually a screen. With Zoom, it's similar to AMS. There's a screen share, and then there's also video. But there were certain times within that functionality where you couldn't have both at once, which made it very difficult. So I think that with AMS, the way it's set up, where there's always the video and sound and then also the screen, it can work a little bit better. But usually when I try to bring technology into the classroom, I have issues. So I still try.
I think it would probably be, it'd be helpful to prepare the students who are at the receiving the distance sites, maybe ahead of time, maybe the class session before the next, to say, next time will be yada yada, because they don't really have a leader in the room, which I think can create a problem. And the other thing that can create a problem is just numbers. So we had enough people here in Vancouver, enough people in Pullman to have these conversations, but if there's just one person sitting there, then they're never quite sure how to participate. So being prepared for that and asking them to maybe do something a little bit different to then share.
Yeah, I had this issue where I had one person in Vancouver for a graduate class I was teaching, and one of the challenges, so that was the challenge that we had, especially when like students were leading and they were developing assignments where people were supposed to pair. And that's when it first surfaced. And then after that, we started using like Skype. So they would pair with someone in my Pullman class via Skype. And so that would like allow them to participate in the same way. And that worked pretty well.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
One of the suggestions
no, go ahead.
We actually have a video conference training. It's kind of fun. Not many people showed up. I mean, but one of the things that we like to do is making sure there's a structured way to share, kind of like how she had to think, pair, share. It's like it like exponentially makes it worse when you have the class. Like, does anybody have anything? If I'm sitting here, I can stare you in the eye, and I can have that teacher presence, and I can look at you. But like I can't even see anybody's faces right now. I can see half of Janet's, and unfortunately I can't really see anybody's in Vancouver unless they start talking. So it makes it a little awkward. So making sure there's a structure, and like Rebecca was mentioning, prepare them ahead of time so they know how to share that. And so if you do a lot of group things, it's okay, now your group gets to share, and that one person will share via. And that's where a lot of the things that she was talking about, like some of the quick response tools, will be really helpful, like Kahoot, Socrative, Google Forms, stuff like that, where you can have everyone respond, but it's all digital, and now you've got a graph to look at or words to look at and that kind of thing. So making sure there's a structure and very clear communications and expectations set up for how they're sharing at all sites, if that helps.
All right. So I have a couple considerations about, to me, there's always the like, this is a wonderful idea, but what are some logistics, right? What are some hurdles you're going to face and things that you should think about before you kind of dive right in? And again, you're welcome for all of my previous failures, because these are the things that I've learned. The first thing that I would say is feedback is great, but I don't think it's required for these types of activities, right? Because I talked about, like, if they write for a minute, and you'd be surprised how much they can actually write for a minute, depending on the difficulty of your question, of course, but some of them can write a lot. And the first time I did it, I had this tendency to want to give them all feedback. That did not work very well because it's just that it's overwhelming. And so I think that feedback is nice if you have the luxury of time. A, tell me how, but B, I don't think you can, but you don't need to. Because the goal of this isn't to evaluate their knowledge in some sort of mastery sense. The goal is really to, one, give them a mental break to refresh that brain. And the engaging with the material is really secondary. It gives them a chance to engage in it. You don't have to hardcore evaluate it. You've given them an opportunity to learn. And so at least in my experience, really that level of feedback's not required. You can if you want to, if you have the time, but I don't do it, and I think it's just fine. The next choice you have to make is how you're going to do this in your classroom. The first choice you have is to just not grade them at all. There's something that they do, and you don't grade them. So maybe they write in their notebook, in their notes. I have done this, and it works just fine. I do it in my research methods class. We do in-class activities and what we're calling these 1-minute mental reflections, but I don't collect them. I don't grade them. It is just for their own development and purpose. The key word you see under here is this might be riskier for your class, right? My research methods class is, this semester, it's 12 students. So they don't really goof off. They take it seriously. I'm not worried that it's a poor use of time. If you teach a 250-person intro type of course where you're worried that they're just writing blah, 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 and they're not doing anything, then maybe ungraded isn't the best choice. Or maybe it is because you have 250 students. I'm just saying that you can decide, and it's okay to have them be ungraded. And I have found that students still do the work. They still engage with it. I really haven't had a student sit back and be like, I'm not doing this. I refuse to think that video is funny. But, it depends. What's right for you? The next choice is to have them graded. It's something that they turn in at the end of class, and you grade them. And I would say if you choose this, things that I've learned is grade them for completion. Did they give it a shot? This isn't a quiz. It's not a test, right? If you're trying to grade them for everything they did wrong, it kind of defeats the purpose. So I grade them did they give it a shot, even if it's not perfect? And I don't give them feedback. I'm just yep, did it. The other thing is I suggest offering more than you ultimately count. So if you're going to count 10 of these at the end of the semester, offer 12. You don't have to. I'm just saying the only reason I do that is because then I don't have I don't have to evaluate the merit of why they've missed class. I can just say you've got 2 freebies. If you have to go to a doctor's appointment, if you sleep in, if you do whatever, that's fine. But if you're missing more than 2 classes, that grace period, or that grace allowance, then that's a habit. It's not a one-time deal. So I usually count 1 a week, so I usually count 15 and I offer 17. But you do what works for you. And then the other option, and I do this, so I do the graded in my Psych 105 class where they're graded and we do them at the end. And then in my stats class, we do extra credit. And we do them every day, and they turn it in every day. And I have help because I have TAs who check off that they turned it in each day. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the semester, I randomly pick 4 days. And I say, if you did it that day, you get a half a point of extra credit for each day that you did it. And what I have found is that students become very attached to these, to the point where I'll have students I wanted to do more. Can I slip it under your office door? And I'm that's not necessary, but if that, go for it. And so they'll ask if they've missed problems of the day, they'll ask to make them up, even though they know they can't earn the credit for them because they find them helpful. So, and students love iClickers. I don't know if you guys have the same response. My students are constantly asking for more iClickers. So these activities tend to be pretty well received by students. Oh, I should mention, I don't count iClickers if they get it right or wrong. It's just, participation. So those are some ways that you can do it, and I think any one of these can work for your class. You just have to think, what resources do you have, and how are you going to get it done, and what are the trade-offs of each decision. Lastly, my suggestion is use a variety. Don't always use the same thing, right? Because, like I said, people habituate. If your way to engage them and your approach is always the same, that novelty effect is going to wear off. You're not going to engage them. So mix it up. Use pictures, use GIFs, use videos, use stories. I pull stories from the news all the time, and I'll tell them about a news story I read, and they'll have to write about it. So mix it up, right? Number 2, and this possibly is most important, keep it simple, keep it interesting, and keep it relevant. You can introduce any number of funny video clips, but if they're not relevant to your class content, I would argue that it's not serving the purpose it should. It should be directly tied to class content, so you can use that refreshing period to have them apply it. So having something fun for the sake of fun is okay, but I feel like if you really want to leverage the benefits, it should be fun and relevant. The other thing is, like, keep it simple. You don't have to have complex questions for them to answer. You don't have to expect a huge amount of knowledge. It's kind of like that little bit of a conversation. You give them something, they take it and write it, and they give it back. It doesn't have to be super detailed. And then finally, and this kind of speaks to the question, is shoot for one break every 15 minutes or so. 75-minute class, try to get in even like I said, like 30 seconds, talking about a picture or talking about a GIF, something that pulls them back in after they've kind of got into that lull, right? So one every 15 minutes or so, depending on class, all those variables. That's it. That's all she wrote. So we can take the rest of the few minutes. I don't know if that clock is right or not. 2 minutes. But if anyone has to go, feel free. If you want to stay and ask questions, if you want to chat, please feel free to do so. But that's all I have for you. And so, like I said, get out there and every few minutes, re-energize your students.
You have the stuff on the student.